And so let us talk a bit about this, since it's going to be clearly a subject of considerable discussion, and we might as well get in on it right now, talking with Mark Paoletta, who is a practicing lawyer. He was in the H.W. Bush White House counsel's office at the time that President Bush 41 nominated Thomas. And I must say very honestly, Mark, the first thing I thought when I heard this, okay, Hollywood is going to do a bit on Clarence Thomas and the Anita Hill hearings. The temptation, frankly, for Hollywood to do a total hatchet job on a conservative justice must be overwhelming. So the only question in my mind is, did they yield to that temptation?
Jim, thanks for having me on. Sure. I was just listening to the intro, and it just is infuriating. These guys actually think that they're telling the truth. I've seen this script. As you note, they'll call it an early script. I got a copy of the script that Senator Danforth and Senator Simpson and many others had. It was dated in late July, late in the filming process, and what I saw was in every instance, this became a, he said, she said issue, and it turned on the credibility of each of those people. And as the American people watched those hearings in 1991, and the nice thing about them, even though it was a national disgrace and a circus, as Justice Thomas called them, the American people got to watch them unfiltered, and they saw both those witnesses, and they saw their corroborating witnesses. And Anita Hill came up short in every instance. Her story never added up. And what you see in this movie, okay, is that they take away all the testimony, all the facts that made her not credible. Okay, so when if you recall, she talked about moving. Right. The most bizarre thing, right, is that she claimed she was sexually harassed at the Department of Education, and then Clarence Thomas got, nominated to a new job, to a new agency at the EEOC, and you'd think, Anita Hill would be very happy that Thomas was leaving, right? If he had
well, I would think so, yeah.
Right, but she, of course, followed him, and she eagerly followed him. Every woman who testified at those hearings, 3 or 4 of them that worked together said Anita Hill was excited. She kept calling over there, all that stuff. When she was asked about this during the hearings, she lied about why she went over. First, she said she tried to imply she was a political appointee, and it turned out that she was a career appointee, career civil servant that Specter confronted her on. When she was confronted with that, she said, well, no, my understanding I was going to lose my job. Nobody who's a career employee, has that understanding. When she then, she also said that she didn't know who Thomas's successor was going to be. And then there was a statement submitted. Harry Singleton was on the premises six weeks before Thomas left, sat right down the hall from Anita Hill, said he would have kept her, met with her, talked to her, and she made it very clear, according to Harry Singleton, she was going with Thomas. And then her last bizarre, preposterous claim was that she left because the Department of Education was going to be abolished, right, which was completely laughable. So those 3 reasons, they're not in those exchanges, which made her look very not credible, are not in the movie at all. So it's that way on every single instance in this movie. So this director, I can't even remember his name, is ridiculous in saying that they're trying to get to the truth, that Danforth can't tell us what the truth is. I'd love to talk to these guys to see what they know about the facts and what they've read as opposed to what they were told, happened in these hearings.
Mm-hmm. It is titled a docudrama, and of course that title alone should give everybody pause, because while I recognize that artistic license allows certainly people putting together a fictional work to base it on real facts, but I've always approached them in a very jaundiced viewpoint, because automatically I don't know necessarily what I'm about to see. If I know the story, then I find myself sitting there watching it and nitpicking what I see on the screen with what I know to be true. If I don't know the story, and I was around certainly for these hearings, I remember them very vividly working for this very network, but if I don't know the story, then I'll leave the theater saying, how much of that was real and how much of it was phony, or in this case, watching the HBO presentation. So either way, docudramas leave a bad taste in my mouth, even if I find them occasionally entertaining.
Jim, I completely agree, and that's why at this point, when I heard this movie was being made and I learned of its sort of slant, I'm actually standing up a website called confirmationbias.com. It's going to go live tomorrow, and it's going to have clips from the real hearings, from those original hearings. That the three examples I was just telling you about are all laid out with an explainer and then the video clips of the exchange. So I've gone through the old hearing clips, and I've pulled out things that I think are important that are left out of the movie so that people can draw their own conclusions. They can go back and remember, oh, yes, that is why we didn't believe Anita Hill. That's why the American people believe Thomas 2-1. So you're right. When people, and that's what I'm concerned about, is that a new generation of Americans, I hope in the heat of the moment, people took their sides. I would hope 25 years later, sort of like the Hiss Chambers story, which changed after the publication of Perjury, but that people. They would be able to look back and sort of take a fresh look at the facts and why it didn't add up. But the more dangerous part of the young people who weren't around, who are going to be heavily influenced by this movie. And you're right, when you don't know what the facts are, you don't know what's true or what's false in this movie. And there's so much that is slanted, all with the agenda of bolstering Anita Hill's credibility and all of her witnesses. And so at that point, you believe her story.
The timing of this, right in the middle of a presidential campaign, you almost wonder if somebody thought of this as an adjunct to the Democratic National Committee by pushing the war on women. It's been around a long time. I mean, I'm just speculating. I don't know what went through the minds of the producers. Maybe it was just to make some money on a documentary. But the timing is certainly interesting.
You're dead on that, Jim. I believe, here's what I think happened. There was a documentary made a couple years ago about Anita Hill called Speaking Truth to Power. It didn't do very well, but some of the filmmakers and producers saw it. I think they were inspired by it in their leftist agenda, and they thought, you know what? We can make this movie and drop it into the middle of election, season. Hillary Clinton will be our nominee. We'll reboot this ridiculous war on women narrative, and that's how we're going to get this movie made. That's how we're going to sell it. And I completely agree with you that this is to kind of drop it into the middle of the presidential election season. And of course, you now have the Supreme Court. And I'm hoping though that with the look back, people will realize what happened. And as you'll recall, after all of this, right? So this happened in 1991, right, Jim? And then in 1992, What happens? We elect Bill Clinton, right, as president. And what happens in 1998? Anita Hill goes out and defends Bill Clinton as basically his de facto defense counsel, because she spent a lot of time looking at the claims of all the president's accusers and belittling them. But she attacked Kathleen Willey. She attacked Monica Lewinsky. She attacked Paula Jones. Of course, she attacked Paula Jones and belittled her claims right before the president settled with Jones for $850,000 to settle that sexual harassment suit. So here she is, defending a notorious, sexual exploiter, sexual harasser in the White House, and now she's coming back to make this movie about 1991. It's shocking.
More to come as we continue our look at this particular film, which is, again, coming out this weekend, and it's something of which you should be aware. Obviously, a lot of people are going to be talking about this. It's called Confirmation. It is based on the battle to get the confirmation of Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas, a battle ultimately successful, although along extremely partisan lines. 1-866-50-JIMBO is our number, 1-866-50. Glad you're with us on the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO. We're talking with attorney Mark Paoletta, who served both in the George H.W. Bush White House, the White House which nominated Clarence Thomas, and also in Congress as chief counsel for oversight and investigations for the Committee on Energy and Commerce. And he is looking at this HBO documentary. Have you had a chance to see any of it? It hasn't debuted per se yet, but you've seen the script. But have you seen any of the actual portrayals?
I haven't, Jim. I've seen some of the trailers, but I have not seen the movie. I'm going to watch it Saturday night when it premieres.
Yeah, as I'm sure a good many people will undoubtedly do, just looking at what will come out in this particular movie. Stars, by the way, for those who don't know, Kerry Washington as Anita Hill and Wendell Pierce as Clarence Thomas. The furor about this whole thing, how far back does this go? For me, it's relatively new, even though I know the movie's been in production for a long time, and I might have heard something about it, but it seems like this whole thing has flared up within the past week or so.
You know, I first learned about it last February, that I heard they were making, they were starting to put together a movie, and I was tracking it, and then I got a hold of the script right before Thanksgiving, and yeah, this is classic, Hollywood, HBO rolling out, a lot of interviews. I will tell you, I had submitted, Time Magazine had asked for a piece from me. We submitted it. They said they loved it. Last Monday, they'd run it within 48 hours. It was why Anita Hill's story didn't add up. And told us they'd run it in 48 hours. It has yet to run. It's almost 2 weeks later. And they've happened to run 4 pro-Anita Hill, pro-movie articles in the same publication. So it's classic, classic Hollywood in terms of rolling out their movies.
Yeah, I guess it was in the report that we heard from Jake Tapper. It was Senator Simpson who wondered why rip open an old wound. I must confess that again, outside of the context of trying to boost Hillary Clinton with the reminders of the allegations of war on women, I'm not quite sure why this is such a big story necessarily. I mean, it was certainly dramatic at the time, but after all, that's been 25 years ago. Yeah,
well, I think that I think the left never gives up on their narratives. I think they're very good at it. And, and one of the narratives is not just the war on women, when I think that's, you sort of get these twofers, right, sort of accomplishing multiple goals. One of them is, helping Hillary Clinton, and as you mentioned, Kerry Washington, who is a big Hillary Clinton supporter and cut a campaign commercial for her. But it's also, I think, to continue to attack Clarence Thomas, who, as a black conservative, is a literally a mortal threat, to the kind of the reigning order. And I think they seize any opportunity to go after him and try and marginalize him. And, he is one of the heroes of our age. He has stood strong on the Supreme Court, and and is unflinching in sort of with his rulings and his defense of the Constitution as Supreme Court justice, and they keep slinging the arrows at him, and he just keeps moving right along. But I do think, Jim, that's part of the reason is that they saw this as an opportunity to go after Thomas again, and of course he is the most prominent conservative now on the Supreme Court with the passing of Justice Scalia.
That's something that we cannot lose sight of. The practitioners of identity politics are really, really incensed by, well, let's just say it, by black folks who don't know their place. In this case, it is you are to be a part of the liberal establishment. It's where you are supposed to be. And for those, of course, who choose to be there, well, good for you. But the idea that it isn't a choice just smacks of plantation thinking. That I know we had a guest on one time who prominent congresswoman from Los Angeles had put him down for having conservative thoughts, both African American, and he was pretty upset about that. And the notion that you should not, after the civil rights struggles, have the right to choose your political thinking is arrogant in the extreme.
Yeah, and I think one of the greatest moments, again, when you go back to those hearings, when Justice Thomas comes back at the committee and says exactly that, the high-tech lynching, for uppity blacks who deign to think for themselves. It was one of the probably the most powerful moment I've witnessed in my year, certainly in Washington. And he hit it right on the head. And so I do think that's a driving force. And it continues to be, and I think that they thought they could attack him again and help Hillary Clinton at the same time.
We'll come back. We'll have one more segment about this with Mark Paoletta, again, attorney with the H.W. Bush administration, also with Congress, and a man who has bad vibes about this forthcoming HBO docudrama titled Confirmation.